Hello.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Canadian History News.
Today we're going to go back 16 decades and look at the main events from 1860 to 2010.
In 1867, the Confederation happened when British North American colonies decided to join together to form a country. The British North American colonies were intimidated by the belief of manifest destiny in the U.S. So the colonies get together and then they're trying to come up with solutions to defend themselves against the U.S. So in 1867, Canada East, which is Quebec, Canada West, which is Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia joined together for the Confederation. In 1873, Prince Edward Island decided to join Canada, which expanded Canada as a country. So the Prince Edward Island joined the Confederation July 1st, 1873. But back in 1864, Premier Edward Palmer already told at a conference that there is no benefit for the PEI to join the Confederation. So later in 1866, Premier James Polk rejected the terms for PEI to join the Confederation at the Quebec Conference. At the meantime, Sir John A. Macdonald was afraid of the threat from the U.S., which is trying to get PEI to join for their expansion. So Sir John A. Macdonald tried to talk to PEI and I tried to lure them in to join the Canadians. 1873, the citizens were given the opportunity to either choose to join the Confederation or to have to increase their tax to help pay the debts that they own for the railway.
Confederation!
Obviously, people choose the Confederation.
Confederation!
Not everyone was satisfied with the Canadian government, so in the 1880s, the Northwest Rebellion happened in Canada. So in 1885, the Northwest Rebellion happens in Canada, fighting between the Canadian government, the Métis, and the First Nation allies for over 5 months. So the result of this rebellion is that the Canadian laws in the West is permanently enforced, and the result of Louis Riel was convicted and hanged. In the 1890s, gold was discovered in Canada, and soon people from all around the world noticed it and decided to come to Canada to find it. In mid-August 1896, George Washington Cartmike discovered gold on Bronze Creek. During the Klondike Gold Rush from 1897 to 1899, more than 100,000 people are coming to the creek and trying to discover gold. Many of them are coming from the U.S., but there's people from all around the world who abandon their families and just come for the gold.
In 1905, Alberta, Saskatchewan entered Canada as the 8th and 9th provinces by 2 federal acts which received royal assent on the 20th of July. Canadians also started asserting its presence in Alberta by sending mounted police to what is now Fort McLeod and building forts in Calgary and Edmonton in fear of the U.S. expansion. The Canadian Pacific Railway reached Calgary in 1883, but the population still remained low. The flood in 1896 opened new varieties which drew settlers, and by 1901 the population rises to almost 80,000. Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier met with Fontaine and James Hamilton Ross, who were members of the territorial legislature. Fontaine and Ross wrote a bill to unify the administrative districts of Alberta and Saskatchewan into one larger western province. After further negotiations, it was decided that the proposed provinces would be too big to administer, and so it will be split into Saskatchewan and Alberta. The Canadian troops fought under the British command during World War I from 1940 to 1918. The Canadian Expeditionary Force consisted of 630,000 men during the Great War of 1914-1918, and they consisted mostly of civilian soldiers. Pre-war farmers, clerks, students, and workers voluntarily enlisted to serve King and the country, although close to 100,000 men were conscripted for service in the last year of the war. Most of the Canadian senior officers were drawn from the middle class: lawyers, engineers, professional soldiers, businessmen, farmers, and even a dentist. On April of 1915, Canadian troops lined up at the Battle of the East. These were in the front line for the first time. Germans released poison gas, but the Canadians held strong against the gas and waited for British reinforcements to come. Canadians stood their ground and made a reputation for themselves.
What?
Canadians also used a tactic called the creeping barrage at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. The purpose was to push the German out of the front because previous attacks had failed. Canadians were able to capture the German front lines within 30 minutes. People thought Vimy Ridge was the battle Canadians proved to be their own country. Sir Arthur Currie was the first Canadian commander. He got promoted to commander after the Battle of Vimy Ridge. They never lost a battle in his command. He refused orders from Britain while still keeping the Canadians in place. They altered weapons and developed their own tactics of their own, which helped succeed. A second stock market crash hit Canada. On October 24th, 1929, the front page of the Toronto Globe shouted, "Stock speculators shaken in a wild day of panic. Billions of dollars have been lost." From 1929 to mid-1930s, 50 active Canadian stocks diminished on average to under half the market value. Shareholders lost more than $500 million.
In 1939, Canada joined World War II, which largely developed the country's industries such as war materials and food supplies, replacing agriculture, the most important sector originally. During the war, Canada greatly contributed in the Battle of the Atlantic and ended up having the third largest navy and fourth largest air force in the world, while started off with little more than nothing. Furthermore, after the war, Queen Elizabeth II signed the Canadian Constitution Act, which transferred the control of the British North America Act to Canada. In 1942, the federal government announced that all people of Japanese origin living in the coastal regions of British Columbia would be relocated to the BC interior or farming areas. This happened due to the conflict between the Allies and the Axis during World War II, and 22,000 Canadian citizens were taken from their homes, with their properties confiscated. Some were put into labor camps, some worked on sugar beet farms, and others exiled to BC's Slocan Valley, all at their own expenses. Their properties were permitted for sales with extremely low prices as well. Years after this incident, controversies still surrounded the nation. In an interview with Prime Minister Louis Laurent in 1961, the actions were defended, stating that
Blood is thicker than water.
However, in 1964, Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson referred to this part a black mark in the nation's history. Decades after, redress payments of $21,000 were finally paid to each individual who was affected by the official policy. Overall, this event helped Canadians to realize the mistakes from the past and to grow from them to form a Canadian identity. Now people are more aware of respecting one another's human rights, even at special times, and to not target a population based on their nationality or race. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. As part of the United Nations, 26,791 Canadians served and participated in the Korean War. The Korean War lasted until 1953. From being part of the war, 516 Canadians died and more than 1,200 were wounded. Furthermore, after the peace armistice was signed between North and South Korea, some Canadians continued to serve in Korea for 2 more years. This event in the 1950s shows how Canada is becoming independent by sending its own army to support the United Nations, which only consisted of 16 countries at the time. This event also shows the support from Canada to the UN. It demonstrates the values that Canadians had and their hopes for a better future with less physical conflict and more compensation to agreements.
There's many laws in the Bill of Rights that protect human rights, such as freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and association. If this document wasn't created, then nowadays people wouldn't be able to have freedom as granted as we do now. The 1960 Canadian Bill of Rights was the country's first federal law to protect human rights and fundamental freedom. Prime Minister John Diefenbaker introduced the idea of Human Rights Bill in 1960. The October crisis started due to the fact of nationalism and the increase of unemployment. Due to unemployment, there was a lot of robberies and bombing in the city. After there's been a lot of kidnapping going on, it brought to Pierre Trudeau's attention. He created the War Measure Act, which stopped the crisis. The October crisis began in October 5th, 1970, with the kidnapping of James Cross, who was a British Trade Commissioner in Montreal. He was kidnapped by a terrorist group called Front de Libération du Québec, or FLQ. Done. The FLQ took a major role in the October crisis. For example, a lot of kidnapping happened. The Minister of Labor, Pierre Laporte, was kidnapped and killed. This is the most recent document to protect Canadians' rights. And some of the protections in the Charter guarantees freedom of religion, of thought, of expression, of press, and a peaceful assembly. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom was the first part of the Constitution Act in 1982. The Charter was signed by Queen Elizabeth II of Canada on April 17, 1982.
In 1995, there was the Quebec referendum. This was the second referendum to ask voters whether Quebec should become an independent country. More specifically, the voters were the Canadian French speakers in the province of Quebec. The actual voting took place on October 30th, 1995. It was also the largest voter count in Quebec history, with 93.52% voting. In the end, the final decision was a no to making Quebec its own country. The vote for no was 50.58%, with 54,288 votes.
No. Yes!
In 2000, the Reform Party of Canada was dissolved and replaced with the Canadian Alliance. The Canadian Alliance was formerly referred to as the Canadian Reform Conservative Alliance. This was a conservative and right-winged federal political party in Canada, which lasted 2000 to 2003. This party was a successor to the Reform Party of Canada. It also inherited its position as the official opposition in the House of Commons of Canada. The alliance was created out of the United Alternative Initiative, which was launched by the Reform Party of Canada. On June 27, 2010, Toronto police arrested nearly 1,000 people in Toronto after protests against the G20 summit. Several police cars were also set on fire in the riots. The protests were for various causes, including poverty. There were no deaths, but 97 officers and 39 people were injured, and at least 40 shops were vandalized. In total, there was about $750,000 worth of damage. Over 1,000 arrests were made that day, making it the largest mass arrest in Canadian history. In the aftermath, the Toronto police of the G20 Toronto Summit were heavily criticized for the brutality against the people protesting.
You have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. You can avoid